Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Mom's Favorites, Books My Mother Loved, the latest installment in my series commemorating my mother, who passed away now, 2 years ago. So this next book is an autobiography, which, according to my father, my mother particularly liked autobiographies, which is amusing in its way because my father has something of a minor dislike for autobiography and biography. He's not wholly without an appreciation of history and biography and so on, but he holds a strong preference in reading material to fiction. But, there is always something to be said about somebody telling you about themselves in their own words. So here we are with Present Indicative by Noel Coward. So this is actor and playwright Noel Coward basically talking about his early life. This is a book that was published in 1937 and is Noel Coward talking about his years from 1899 when he was born until 1930, which is when the book ends. So this is a book that is written very much in ignorance of what was to happen in World War II, so, one might occasionally stumble across an accidental irony in something that he says simply because, well, how could he know in 1937 what was going to be happening in 1940 through 1945 and onward? It's not really known. So the thing about present indicative is, now you have to keep in mind, I'm not a play person. I don't go to see a lot of plays. It is somewhat like video games, a form of entertainment that I understand intellectually the attractions of it, but at the same time do not find myself deeply wedded to that particular type of entertainment. I'm very much the kind of person who, if I can't hit pause on something, wander off and come back to it, I'm not really sure I want to be doing this. And you can't hit pause in the middle of a play and wander off and come back to it because, well, that's not how the real world works. So this being an autobiography, heck, biography in general, there are, of course, pictures of Noel Coward. The frontispiece picture is of Noel Coward, as I assume he was in 1937. A coy, sly-looking picture of a man with perhaps too much Brill cream in his hair, but it's interesting because, of course, you're talking about a playwright and a star of the stage, and we're looking at a man who, while not bad looking, is clearly also not hugely handsome. One must assume that he must have had a great deal more charisma on stage. The thing to note about this book, first of all, is that while he doesn't precisely disclaim his ego, he does spend a great deal of time emphasizing his humbleness, his awareness of what he owes other people, his awareness of where luck has come into things, of where he, should have worked harder, of his dismay about things that he wrote when he was younger, including a rather amusing bit where apparently there are a lot of people who had been talking about several of his plays and discussing the despair of the First World War and how it came through in spades in his work, and him saying, I don't believe I felt any despair in relation to the war, and what is coming through in my work is, if there is anything of that nature in my work, I don't know where it came from, you'll have to look elsewhere. And this is wittily written. There's a great deal of that sense of light repartee in how he writes in this book. He's deliberately going for a light tone, an amusing tone, a frequently flippant tone in a lot of ways. And it's the sound of somebody who is well aware that he's known for writing frequent bon mots and is a fundamental of how he writes and communicates. But the way he writes it, and a great deal of his discussion of his early life, while his discussion of his time as a young man, as a child, as a teen, tween, a teenager, what have you, he discusses that with a great deal of conscious awareness of his ridiculously overblown ego at such a young age, but his definitive efforts to disclaim that ego in a lot of ways are very much the lady doth protest too much, and you feel like he's desperately trying to cover up the fact, or is perhaps not even aware of precisely how much his ego is just dripping off the words in this book. Now, again, it's difficult to tell because it's true that by the end of the book, some of the ego has smoothed out, and it may be that he has thrown himself bodily and wholly into the mind of himself at that much younger age, in order to bring us into the mind of somebody with that much of an ego, but it is mildly off-putting. And so at the same time as I can appreciate witty writing, it does throw me off. So there are, of course, photographs of himself as a youngster, and I have to say, I think that this picture of, quote, myself aged 2 years, unquote, is perhaps the most dynamic and exciting picture in this, out of the complete collection of black and white plates. Well, there are no color plates. I don't see why I was distinguishing that. Of plates in this book, this is probably the most dynamic one, possibly because at age 2 years, he wasn't aware enough of the proprieties to sit still and smile more demurely. This is clearly or at least I suspect that this is most likely a publicity-type photograph done of himself as Slightly in Peter Pan in 1913, which he would have been about 13 or 14 years old at the time of doing this, playing one of the lost boys in Peter Pan. And the thing is that it has that particular quality that you get in the staged photographs that people do for stage productions, that and I'll get back to photographs taken off the stage in a moment. There's a very peculiar quality to these sorts of photographs because, of course, stage clothing and stage acting has a broadness to it that is very, very different from film acting, something that was discovered much to many people's dismay, or realized more explicitly to many people's dismay, when Katharine Hepburn tried to take to the stage and couldn't function because she was a film actress and was used to playing to a camera that can get 2 inches away from your face. Because the thing about playing to a camera that gets 2 inches away from your face as opposed to being on the stage is that your acting has to be much more subtle, because you don't want to be overblown when somebody is 2 inches away from your face. Whereas when you are on stage, you have to reach the back of the theater. And so there's a very, very strange quality to these sort of stage pictures, because you have staged the picture to emulate the stage, but at the same time you have somebody who is specifically doing this for a camera with a professional photographer who is trying to reduce things. It creates a very odd push-pull in these sorts of photographs. And a photograph with Molly Kerr, I don't know a lot about English stage actors of the 1920s. This this looks like a still taken from during the course of an actual play, during the course of actual rehearsal or stage or something. And there's an artificiality to pictures taken of performers on stage that is quite different from anything else. There's an unnatural posing to them because, of course, what looks natural on stage is actually wholly unnatural. There are a great many things in acting that are totally natural in the milieu in which you're supposed to see them, but when you take them outside of that, they're really, really not, and weird. Like this appears to be another staged photograph for his this year of Grace show. And you look at this, and with Gertrude Lawrence, Adrienne Allen, and Laurence Olivier in Private Lives in 1930, and there's just a lot there that looks very, very artificial, that you can see that this is a stage play, and that if they were still moving, if they were being dynamic, if they were reading their lines, it wouldn't look nearly as false and problematic and not real. But this looks so unreal because of the nature of stagecraft. And I know I haven't really talked about the book, and part of that is because this is autobiography. It's, I did this and then I did that. He talks about his bouts of depression. He talks about his eventual, after years of working in acting, of his realization that as someone who saw himself primarily as a playwright rather than an actor, albeit someone who enjoyed acting, he started to put a limit on how long he was going to do runs of plays, simply because he couldn't write when he was doing a play, because doing 8 shows a week means you have to spend extra time in rehearsals, you have to spend all of this time preparing, you have to be there on time at the theater, you have to go to bed early, you have to do all kinds of other things. And being an actor in a regular play is a full-time job, and if you're doing that full-time job, you don't necessarily have the emotional, mental wherewithal to write. It's something I think many of us who have artistic inclinations discover with full-time jobs is what seemed super easy when you were at university or a teenager living at home or what have you, is that when you have a full-time job, you don't want to also do this other thing, because you also want to get home and just read that book or watch that show or listen to that album, and it adds up. You can't do the full-time job and then also do this incredibly wearing artistic thing and also have time to do other things in your life. And that if you wanted to have some sort of balance, you have to give something up. And in his case, he chose to, step back from the stage. And so it's an interesting book. And it's an interesting look into the mind of this playwright, who, after all, doesn't spend an inordinate amount of time talking about writing plays. He spends a great deal more time talking about people that he knows, and I assume name-dropping, although, again, I don't know much about the actors of the, aughts and teens and 20s and into the early 30s, in England in particular. Nor do I know much about Noel Coward, except what I read in this book. But I think it's interesting, it's light, and it's certainly worth the read if you're into this kind of thing. I'm not sure what else to say. Certainly hasn't given me any insights into my mother. So that's everything, I guess, and I'll see you all next week.